This one's from my girlfriend. When I was a child, around the age of 6, perhaps younger, I used to visit my uncle's house on occasion with my mum and Nan. Each time I was there, I would go to my uncle's bedroom to look at the mummy that laid on his bed. That's what I thought I was seeing. An adult woman that seemed to look like they were wrapped up in bandages or some material. My uncle was the kind that would tease you or wind you up, so I never believed it was real, just something he'd rigged to scare me. Each time I went to his house, I would drag my mum or my Nan into that room to show them. And frustratingly, each and every time, they would claim not to be able to see a very obvious mummy laid out on the bed. It got to the point one day, after dragging my mom and Nan up to my uncle's room, and them not believing me, that after they left, I stayed to watch the mummy lay in bed. I stayed in the doorway, the furthest I would ever go, with the side of the bed facing me, and glared as angrily as a little girl could at the woman in bed. Then it sat up and turned to face me. I froze. It was when the thing started to get off the bed towards me that I discovered my legs again and ran. Years later, my Nan took me and my friend to my uncle's house to dog sit while he was away. It just so happened that his bedroom was where we would be having our sleepover. The room had been changed and there was no mummy this time around, but retelling this story was enough to freak us both out the night, though it didn't stop us sleeping. My mum and Nan can recall me asking about the bandaged woman in the bed and other things I'd seen and experienced as a child, but no one else had experienced the mummy in that house. This happened when I was 7. I grew up on the military base. We lived in the PMQs, not entirely sure on the age of the houses, but our basement did have a bomb shelter in it. So I had just broken my leg and my dad moved my bed to the living room and set up my computer so I could play Buzz Aldrin's Race to Space whenever I wanted to. I was also given a frying pan and a pot if I ever needed anything in the middle of the night. So it's God knows what time, and I'm woken up by a sound. I look around and don't really see anything until I notice a hand come out of the entranceway to the living room. I immediately look at the TV to see if I can see its reflection. I do. It looks like a man my father's build and height, but the uniform was wrong. My father a few times was called and deployed on moment's notice. I could just tell this was his World War II uniform, so I freaked out. I grabbed the frying pan and pit and began slamming them together as hard as I could. The figure in the TV just walks away into the dining room and then turned to the kitchen from what I could tell. Just as he turns, my father is already in the living room asking what's wrong. I replied, "Someone's in the house." He immediately goes for his baseball bat and starts searching the house and checking the locks and windows. Then gets on the phone and calls the MPs, and before I know it, he and the neighbors and the MPs are outside securing the whole damn neighborhood. They never found anyone, and I've never had a similar experience since then. I was 7 or 8 years old and visited my paternal grandparents with the rest of my family. They lived deep in the woods, and I always hated it there. It felt like someone was watching and was always eerily quiet, like not even crickets chirping. My little brother and I shared a bed in one room on the ground floor. My brother would sleep at one end, his head against the window or wall, and I would be on the other, facing the window. On this particular morning, I woke up first. The sun was brilliant, making the room gold through the curtains. And there, a silhouette against the window, was a deer with the biggest rack of antlers I have ever seen. It was right there, like almost pressed against the window in profile. I stared in awe, and that is when it changed. In one smooth movement, it reared up on its hind legs, and it was no longer a deer but a man. There were only 2 men in the area, my grandfather and my dad, and it was clearly neither. Not sure if that made it better or worse. Grandfather was very built for his age, dad had a gut. This silhouette was clearly younger, muscular, but not in the like a brick way my grandfather was. It exuded strength and scared the hell out of me. It stared to the side for a moment and then strode off with purpose. I don't know what I saw. I want to believe it was just a groggy mind of a half-awake kid, but I remember the fear slicing into me. I remember the feeling of something being out there. I saw a humanoid, something in the woods outside my childhood home. This was rural northern Wisconsin and I was 14. Up until that day, I had zero fear of the woods. I spent most of my time out there exploring and feared nothing. My parents had a lousy marriage and fought a lot, and I felt more at home outside than in the house. On hot nights, I would take a sleeping bag and sleep on the roof of an old shack on our property. I saw bears, I saw wolves. They were always more afraid of me than me of them. I didn't believe in ghosts, Bigfoots, demons, or even God. I only got lost out there once when dark fell sooner than I expected. I stayed calm, found the North Star, and knew that if I continued south, I'd eventually come across the old railroad tracks near my house. Even the thought of spending the night out there didn't bother me. The thought of my mom's rage when I didn't come home did. So it was summer. I had just turned 14. My mom had left my father worked all the time, sister was living on her own. Once school was out, it was me and my cat, and this is before the internet or smartphones. We lived on the dead-end dirt road, and around noon I took my usual stroll down the long driveway to check the mail. My cat followed me everywhere, and I actually kind of relied on him to give me the heads up if there was a bear or something close by. A bit of movement behind me as I stood at the mailbox made me aware that something across the road in the trees, but there was pesky deer everywhere. I heard a loud crash, then like something very loudly making its way through the brush. It's like every goddamn classic horror movie. My brain had no capability for the thought of anything paranormal or spooky. I simply tucked the mail under my arm and headed into the woods to investigate. My cat followed close behind. I got about 10 yards in when I noticed what I hadn't noticed before. There was no noise. Nothing. It was a beautiful June day and there wasn't a single bird singing, no insects, no leaves rustling. It was absolutely silent. At the same time, I registered the silence. I got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I stopped immediately and started scanning the woods for deers, hunters. Know what I'm talking about when I say you look for the shape of a deer instead of trying to pinpoint them by color. That's when I spotted it. 2 brown, furry legs. The top of it concealed by tree branches. I went to sigh with relief when my cat hissed. I looked down and he was completely poofed out with his back arched, looking at the same thing I was. I looked back up and the legs moved. Not like a deer, like a human. Everything happened at once after that. I dropped the mail, picked up my cat by the scruff and ran for it. Whatever was out there with me was running after me. I've never run so fast in my life. I tore up the driveway, into the house, locked the door and grabbed the phone. I called my next door neighbor, who was the ex-chief of police, when he came over immediately with his pistol. He checked out the spot I was in and found nothing. I was so hysterical I was in tears. He stayed with me until I was able to reach my mom and have her come get me. Of course they thought I was completely high or delusional. I know exactly what I saw and felt. It was broad daylight. I never felt safe in those woods again and stopped sleeping outside. Edit. I should probably add that I thought I was looking at a deer's forelegs, but once it took a step I realized the legs were far too thick and human, but with fur for that, and there were only 2 legs, not 4. Plus I realized it was way too tall for a deer to be concealed by the tree branches. It all happened within seconds. Edit 2. I was and still am the calm, rational middle child, and my parents trusted me. They let me sleep outside. Sometimes we all did to catch a meteor shower. I'd casually mention running into a wild animal. My dad would casually say, "You made a lot of noise?" Good. I was quiet and sensible, and had never freaked out about anything before then. I had my neighbor's number for emergencies and had never called him prior to that. This is how shaken I was. I was embarrassed when he and my mom looked at me like a fool, and later, when my dad also didn't believe me. Not once did my instincts set me off in those woods, until that very moment, when I absolutely, beyond a doubt, realized I was prey and ran for my life. I was hiking in the Cascades in Oregon. I was in a more remote area of the range. On the 6th or 7th day on the trail, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. I chalked it up to being a mountain lion in the area. But the weird thing was that the uneasy feeling never left. That night is when I heard the howling. It wasn't wolves, or bears, or any other animal I had ever heard. The closest thing I could relate it to is the noises apes and monkeys make. This persisted for the next few nights. Eventually, things started rummaging through my campsite. Naturally, I assumed it was a bear or raccoon. But then on the 11th day, I woke up and my food bag was removed from the tree. Something had cut the line, though. All my food was gone. I decided to keep pushing. I had 4 days left till the end of the trail. I'm familiar with what I can and can't eat in the area, and I could always fish for food. The same nightly activities occurred, and on the 13th night, something started throwing rocks at my tent. For some reason, I lost it. I screamed into the darkness for whatever it was to leave me alone, hoping it was just some person fucking with me, and maybe they'd scream out, "Sorry, mate," or something. Instead, it grew quiet for the first time in nights. Nothing could be heard. Then a scream louder and more vicious than any other night cut through the night. Then nothing. Complete and utter silence again. Despite it being quiet, I wasn't able to sleep that night. I just waited. The next day I continued my hike, dead tired, just wanting to get out. The hair on the back of my neck still standing, the forest still quiet. I felt like I was being hunted. Towards the end of the day, I had sat down to rest before pushing a few more miles when I saw it. Something tall and large, bigger than any man or animal I had seen, sliding through the forest, not making a noise. I yelled at it. It turned to look at me. I never got a good look at it through the trees and the brush, and it was dark, but I knew that whatever it was causing this. I threw a rock at it and then pulled my knife out. The thing just kept staring at me. I don't know what kicked in, but I no longer felt scared. I felt angry, and I ran at the thing. It ran from me, and I chased it in the woods. It had long strides and easy outpaced me, but I continued the chase. After several minutes, I gave up and collapsed in exhaustion. I rested for a bit before backtracking my way back to my backpack and resting area. I was tired and made camp there. Another night of silence when I woke up the next day and had about 10 miles till I was out. Exhausted, hungry, mentally drained, I made my way out. As I got closer and closer to the end of the trail, the typical forest noises returned. Birds, bugs, mice running through the undergrowth. All these noises slowly returned. I no longer had this feeling of unease. I got to the trail's end, sat in my car, and cried. To this day, I still pass it off as someone just fucking with me. But the way that thing moved in the forest, I just don't know. I told a park ranger about it, and he jokingly said they have had a bunch of Bigfoot sightings in the area, but most likely it was a local fucking with me or my own imagination. I do a lot of long hikes, but that 15 days was by far the worst. I'm not sure if it fits here, but I'll tell my story. It's a long one, so bear with me. I've never typed it out before, only told it aloud. It's been many years, but the fear has stayed with me. When I was around 12 or so, my mom and I lived in an apartment in Texas. She was a single mom, so it was just her and I for many years. I was and still am very fortunate that she puts me first and did her best to make sure I had what I needed. Unfortunately, her work schedule didn't allow for her to be home when I got off for school, so I usually had to take care of myself in the afternoons until she got off. It wasn't too bad. Usually by the time I fixed myself a snack and got through my homework, she was home. I should note that at this time I was still sleeping with my mom. I initially started out in my own room, but I began having these horrible nightmares. It was the same dream every time. I was sleeping in my room and I could see a figure lurking in the hallway. I'd get up and turn on the lights and something or someone would grab my hand and I would instantly wake up. The touch of that hand was the coldest feeling I'd ever experienced. It was so vivid in my mind. I felt incredibly sad, almost like the happiness was draining out of me. I started making excuses about wanting to sleep with her. My mom never made a big fuss about it. We would stay up late reading on a regular basis and I would accidentally fall asleep. I hated that room and avoided going in there at all costs. It got so bad that every morning before school, I would lay out a change of clothes in my living room so I could have them ready when I got home. My mom started to notice this routine and asked why I didn't just simply change in my room. I just made up some stupid excuse and brushed it off. I kept my bedroom shut at all times and would hurry past it if I needed to use the restroom. The dreams seemed to stay away once I stayed in my mom's room. It had been so long that I started to forget about them. One night my mom had already fallen asleep, but I was still nose deep in my latest library book. It was late, definitely past midnight, when I got an eerie feeling. I couldn't place it, but I was instantly uncomfortable. I put my book down and noticed a lump under the covers, towards the end of the bed. We had a cat at the time, but I knew it wasn't her because she hated anything on top of her. I stared at the lump and it started to move towards me. I froze. Every fiber in my body was screaming to move but was paralyzed with fear. I finally mustered a weak, "Mom?" and nudged her, all while keeping an eye on the lump. Finally, my mom woke up and as soon as she spoke, the covers went completely flat, like a balloon whose air had been released. I went into a crying fit and told my mom what happened. She assured me that I was reading too much scary stuff before bed and my eyes had played tricks on me. I convinced myself she was right and went to sleep. One weekend, I had a friend sleep over. My mom made a big deal about preparing my room for my friend and thought that maybe since I wouldn't be alone that it wouldn't be an issue. We did the whole typical sleepover shenanigans, played with each other's hair and gushed over our latest crushes. all while listening to the newest NSYNC CD. I started to get anxiety as bedtime loomed closer. I somehow convinced my friend that it would be better if we made a bed on the floor in my mom's room because my room got hot or some shit like that. We quietly moved to my mom's room on the floor next to her bed and fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up instantly and sat straight up. I was staring at a slump on the floor on my mom's bed. I suddenly became overwhelmed with the urge to touch it. I lifted the sheet and placed my hand upon the smoothest object I'd ever touched. I instantly felt every happy memory being sucked away from my body. All thoughts and emotions were drained. I felt cold, colder than any weather I'd been through. I became empty, like a shell of a person. Nothing was left but numb darkness. It was as if I was under a trance. The next morning, I retold what happened to my mom and she broke down in tears. She thought that this was all behind us, but clearly it was more than she previously thought. I didn't do much that day. My mom busied herself with Sunday chores while I stared blankly at the TV. As she stepped out for a bit to do some laundry, she ran into her neighbor. Her name has left me, but I remember her being a caring figure in my life and a wonderful friend to my mother. My mom confided in her about all the odd occurrences and her face went grim. Our neighbor was Native American and was super in tune with her culture and traditions. She explained to my mother that for some time she had been feeling a presence and could not place its origin. My mom asked her to come inside to speak with me. She agreed, but upon stepping up to our door, she retreated. She said the origin was our apartment, and the spirit would not allow her to cross the threshold. At this point, my mom was hysterical, as most mothers would be if someone told them an evil being was possessing her and her daughter's home. Our neighbor apologized, but promised she would gather what she could to help us. In the meantime, my mom reached out to my grandmother. Not that shit wasn't already weird, but shit got even weirder. My grandmother immediately told my mom to call my uncle. He had phoned my grandmother earlier in that day, asking about me, but didn't say why he was so concerned about my grandmother, pretty much brushed it off. My mom called my uncle, and as soon as he answered the phone, he said, "I've been waiting on your call. We need to act now." It still gives me chills to talk about it. We weren't close with this uncle at all and hadn't talked to him in years. He told us that an evil spirit had possessed our home and he was trying to help us get rid of it. He sent us a bottle of oil that was supposedly poured upon where Jesus was laid to rest. I feel as if that bit was a crock of bullshit. But whatever, made it sound pretty legit. He instructed us to bless all doorways, entryways. This meant every door, closet, and window. He gave us a prayer to repeat and told us to make the sign of the cross over each one. Our neighbor had also given us a dream catcher to place upon the bed frame that night we blessed the house. She made us swear to stay in the bedroom that night and not emerge until morning. My mom and I quickly blessed the house and both passed out of exhaustion. That night was the first night I had slept soundly since we moved in. My mom, however, laid awake the entire night. Whatever we did pissed off the spirit. She said she held me tight and put her back towards the window as someone or something howled crying the entire night. It was terrifying screams, as if the realization had sunk in that we had shut the spirit out and it was no longer welcome. She said that night was the longest night of her life. To this day, I have no clue what I experienced. If my mom hadn't gone through it with me, I probably would have thought I was crazy. Seeing it laid out through text definitely makes it seem insane and completely unreal. I was around 12 when this happened to me. During this time, my brother and I shared a room and had bunk beds. We had the top bed while I had the bottom. The room was quite long but really skinny, almost a L shape if you will. Anyways, I remember waking up late one night. At the time I could not remember what I was feeling, but now I could describe it as dread and extreme anxiety. I stood up out of the bed and checked to see my brother sleeping. As I turned towards the doorway, I noticed it was open. This was odd because we always slept with the door closed to keep the cat out. As I walked towards the door to shut it, I could see a shadow in the doorway that was illuminated by the hallway nightlight my dad had set up for us. I peeked around the corner and that was when I saw it. Whatever it was I saw. In the doorway was a massive figure. If I had to guess, probably around 6'6" to 6'7", extremely lanky. The only details I could make out was its long, skinny arms and its eyes, which were red. I remember staring at it for a couple seconds before I entered the room, having to bend at the waist just to get underneath the door frame. The last thing I remember was it rapidly approaching the bunk bed, then it goes blank. I woke up on the floor early the next morning. I told my dad about it the next day, but of course he chalked it up to a bad dream, and realistically, he was probably right. It's just difficult to get over the fact that, to this day, I still remember whatever was in the doorway and the exact feeling I had from start to finish. The final thing about this encounter that convinced me something happened that night was my brother. About 2 days later, he pulled off his shirt, and he had what looked like 3 insect bite marks on his upper right back, forming a triangle. They went away relatively fast, but to this day, he has a mole in the direct center of where the bites were. I'm going to write this on behalf of my mother, who passed away a year ago and saw and heard many things that the average person wouldn't believe. To start, I live on a farm in a house that was built in the early 1900s. To date, 4 people have passed away in the house or near the house. My great-great-grandma died in a rocking chair. My great-great-grandpa was riding in a wagon down our driveway when his team of horses got spooked and he flew off and broke his neck. A hired man's wife fell down our stairs while she was pregnant and hemorrhaged and died. And my aunt died in my old bedroom at age 2. Over the years, my mother and brother have experienced many different spooky things on our property. In the early 1980s, they both heard footsteps walking up and down our upstairs hallway in the middle of the night. My brother was alone once. He was outside doing farm choirs in the dark. He was maybe 500 feet from our house. He had the urge to look over, and every single light in the house was on. My mom has heard people whispering her name. She's heard creaky noises in the house and sounds as if someone has fallen, big crashes, etc. My father has been oblivious to everything and has never heard any of it. In 2004, my mother went outside to fill our wood stove at around 10 p.m. On her way back to the house, she got the feeling that she was being watched. As she turned to look over to her right, she saw this very skinny, gray being standing below our house, staring over its shoulder at her. She got this intense feeling that it wanted her to see it. After a few seconds, it bolted away from the house. She was so freaked out that she sprinted into her house, locked the doors, and collapsed on the floor in hysterics. For years, she'd never tell anyone the story. This was an especially interesting experience, as in the late 1960s, our neighbor just over the hill had great aliens walk into his barn and actually talk to him. It was investigated by some big-shot UFO investigator out of Chicago, too. I personally had never heard or seen anything in our house until recently. Over the years, friends had come over and saw shadow people in our house or heard the pitter-patter of small dog feet on the floor upstairs. As I said earlier, my mother passed away a year ago, and we have her urine sitting on a table downstairs, just below my bedroom. For about 3 months, every night I was in the home alone. My dad is a trucker, so he's gone for a week at the time with a 5-day break in between. I would hear this pounding noise every 30 seconds coming from somewhere in the walls as I tried to fall asleep. I've heard crashing noises, and my dog has perked his ears up because of them. A lot of people are too freaked out to stay overnight at my house without my dad being here. And I'm starting to get that way, too. Late to the party, and this is a bit long. But for as long as I can remember, I've had a spirit that stays with me. I always chalked it up to an imaginary friend when I was a kid. I named him George, and he's been a blessing in my life. I've had plenty of paranormal experiences, but this one there was someone else who witnessed it. About 2.5 years ago, my fiance and I moved into a new condo. We got pregnant about a month later, and I noticed that George had begun clinging to my fiance. He's always been a protector. Anyways, fast forward about another month, around Christmas time, I noticed that George wasn't around. Every night he was gone. I was visited by a little boy who was scared and running from something. That something was an evil spirit in the form of a little girl. Every encountered ended him saying, "She's here." He'd vanish, and I'd be overwhelmed by this feeling of doom. Then I would see her. It got to the point that I was sleeping downstairs to avoid the encounters. They seemed to stay upstairs until my last real encounter. I walked into the kitchen, late one night, to get a glass of water. There was the little boy, huddled on the floor. He didn't acknowledge me, which was odd because he always came to me. He looks up, stares straight through me, and says, "Goodbye." Just then the little girl appears and takes him away, violently. Turns out he was staring through me and at my wife. She had somehow managed to come downstairs unnoticed. She's known about my experiences but never seen one transpire. She knew then why I hadn't been sleeping in the bed. I'd have enough, and the next morning I'd go out and buy some sage. As my fiance and I were cleansing the apartment, we began hearing rather strange creaking noises, almost as if the whole condo was shifting. We make our way upstairs, and right at the top of the stairs, a huge gust of wind blows out of the sage. At that moment, George had returned. All was right, and the little girl hasn't since returned. My son is now 2 years old and sees George. He even calls out for him. I think it's cute, as does my wife. It still kind of scares her because she knows of the things I've dealt with. I've posted this one before, but here it goes. I witnessed an alien abduction back in 2001. This takes place when I was 13. A friend of mine wanted to help her grandparents set up their computer. I said sure and rode my bicycle to their house. I get there and clouds appear, so I decide to make this pretty quickly. I set up the computer and install AOL for them, showing them all how it works and such. They go back and sit on the couch while I get my backpack to get ready to leave, and their other granddaughter, who was about 4 to 6 years old, I can't remember which, was sleeping in the other room. All of a sudden, a cold breeze went through the room. It was odd as all the doors and windows were shut. The grandparents looked towards the kitchen, and what I saw made me freeze in place. There were 3 creatures standing in the kitchen. 2 of them were short, gray creatures with a thicker neck than described, with their eyes closer to the size of their head. They wore silver jumpsuits. In between them was a taller creature looking like a humanoid mantis, wearing a black robe with a yellow stripe going down the middle. They walked to the other room and a minute later returned with a robed creature carrying the granddaughter in its arms. It's looking at me and I get the feeling it knows who I am. I don't know why I got the feeling, but I did. I was very scared. More of the situation than of them, and the grandparents were looking at this too, but not doing anything. I decided to just say screw this and fought off all the fear I could and clumsily charged towards them. I didn't even make 3 steps before the grandfather stopped me and told me they would bring her back. The creatures didn't move and continued to look at me. I couldn't get any more words out of my throat because I didn't even know what to think at this point. All of a sudden, the light stretched around them and they vanished. An odd glow remained for a few seconds before fading. After a minute of awkward silence and the grandfather repeating, "She will be brought back soon," I decided to leave. I rode my bicycle back home fast as I could while looking back to see if some ship was hiding in the clouds. Nothing was there, and I didn't sleep that night I got home. The next day I did tell my friend what happened, and she did tell me it has happened before. The grandparents and other family members have tried to stop it, but to no avail. They just accepted it with a look of defeat and moved on. Granddaughter was brought back after a few hours. A while after this, their whole family moved elsewhere. I've heard from other people who claim to experience similar events, and I feel they are legit. When I was in college, I lived in a dorm for native students. It was the fullest multicultural house in the Greek village, and we were so proud. About 9 of us lived there. The college was built on our tribe's old wintering grounds, and the school has disposed of things in a pretty shady way back in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, over the first few months we lived there, several of us noticed strange things. We weren't comfortable by ourselves. We'd see black people's shapes out of the corners of our eyes. Somebody even swore they had a conversation with me when I wasn't in the house. They said the me was a bit off and vacant and strange, but they couldn't figure out why. This happened with a few of us. Things were being broken and misplaced. We would hear strange wind noises sometimes. We finally went to someone in our tribe who dealt with things like this. He came and cleared the house with tobacco and water. We prayed and cleansed ourselves. 2 of us stayed in the house while he worked. I distinctly remember him walking through the darkened living room, opening the door and hearing what I heard like a tornado whiz through the room very quickly. Then it was over. Turns out it wasn't malevolent or anything, just something that had attached itself to the land. We never had any problems after the cleansing.